Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to WOTS Weekly Features. Today's guest is Jivesh Parasram, author of Take the Milk, Na from Playwrights Canada Press. We'll be talking about the creative connection between performance and written word and asking questions about identity plays. I'm Yeli, and I'll be your host. WOTS Toronto operates on land that is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Paytune First Nations, the Seneca and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Anishinaabeg and Allied Nations to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace. We encourage you to educate yourself about the land that you live on wherever you're tuning in from. All right, so Jiv is an award-winning multidisciplinary artist of Indo-Caribbean descent. He grew up in Mi'kma'ki, Nova Scotia, before moving to Toronto, also known as Toronto. In 2009, he co-founded Pandemic Theatre, through which much of his work has been created, often in close collaboration with co-founder Tom Arthur Davis. He is the recipient of 2 Herald Awards for his service to the independent theatre community in Toronto, including the Ken McDougall Award. Jiv won the 2018 Toronto Arts Foundation Emerging Artist Award and was a member of the second cohort of the Cultural Leaders Lab with the Toronto Arts Council and the Banff Centre. In 2018, Jiv took on the position of artistic director for Rumble Theatre, and he lives primarily in unceded Coast Salish territories, also known as Vancouver, BC. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jiv.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so let's get started. I'm very excited. Jiv has graciously agreed to perform a little piece of his play for us today. So whenever you're ready, take it away for us.
Cool. Will do. And for everyone who's watching, I've asked Yeli to do. So part of this piece has a little bit of call and response kind of throughout the play. So in this case, I'm gonna ask Yeli to be your audience. Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of that's a little bit into the play, so pretty close. Kind of there's an introduction to what it's gonna be, and then this is kind of like jumping into like the first story, so to speak. So it starts like this. Let's play a game, shall we? It's a call and response game. Everybody down with that?
Yes.
Yeah, all right, nice. So, the dog says...
Woof.
Woof. Okay, nice. The cat says...
Meow.
Right? The goat says...
Bah.
Yeah, okay, good enough. I mean, in fairness, goats have very complicated vocal cords, so it could go a lot of ways. The cow says...
Moo.
Right, so you are wrong. I will fight you on that one. Now, to be fair, I'll chalk it up to a cultural translation thing, because most of the cows that I know happen to be Trinidadian cows, much like myself, but we're going to get into that in a little bit. But see, I've always thought that cows, or at least Trini cows, they make the sounds a lot more like... And if you ignore them, or you annoy them or something, they make this awesome sound where they go... And because I've always thought the Trinidadian accent kind of sounds like people are constantly whining and complaining. No offense to any Trinis who are watching, but it kind of does. I've always kind of felt like they're going, "Hey boy, take the milk, nah. Take the milk, nah. Oh yeah, come on, take the milk, nah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, come on, take the milk. Oh good, now they gonna treat me so. Oh they gonna make me make the blasted milk. Now oh you gonna hold up yourself. Oh you come and take the blasted milk. Come on, take the milk. Cows are fucking awesome. I've known this as far back as I can remember. I don't think I've always known why. I do know that sometimes when I talk about cows and somebody makes a cutesy joke like, cows, yum, I have a visceral desire to break their face, which is weird because I'm not really a violent person. I'm a Caribbean dude, you know? Laid back, airy, ganja, bada ding ding dang dang do. So yeah, I'm none of that. But I am Trinidadian. And the first reaction I tend to get from a lot of people when I tell them I'm Trinidadian is, but you're not black. Except for in the Maritimes, where they still think I'm black. And it's just amazing to me that you wouldn't just naturally assume that there is a massive population of South Asians in Trinidad, because it's pretty much a massive population of South Asians fucking everywhere. We get around, man. Pretty much anywhere the British went, we were down to follow. And if by follow, you mean be subjected to imperial starvation policy in your homeland, and then when faced with no other option but to attempt to survive, get ported off under false promises into indentured servitude to who the fuck knows where. Or, follow. Quote, Winston Churchill, I hate Indians. They are beastly people with a beastly religion. The famine was their own fault for breeding like rabbits. So yeah, I'm Trinidadian. Specifically, I'm Indo-Trinidadian. And apparently we got there because we fuck like champs. Other quote from Winston Churchill. I'm Winston Churchill and I'm a fucking cockface. Now, one of those quotes is historically accurate. But which one? I'll never tell. Indians are beastly people. That's what I got for starting off today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so
Thank you.
much. It's funny how as soon as I'm put on the spot, I forget what sound a dog makes.
That's fair. They can make different sounds, right? Depends on the dog.
Totally, so fair. Thank you so much. It's always so nice to hear those words said like in the voice of the person, especially with plays, because it was a delight to read, but it was even more of a delight to watch you say that and perform for us.
All shucks.
Let's see. Let's dive into these questions that we've got. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in the foreword of the play, before the play even starts, it's mentioned that the play started out as something that was supposed to be a 5-minute performance, turned 30-minute performance, turned into this full-length play. Could you tell us a little bit about that creative process from taking it to what was supposed to be 5 minutes to what is now this epic long performance situation?
Yeah, so it had like a real like iterative build kind of organically and in a way, like I didn't know that the play was going to actually kind of move towards anything. I talk about that a little bit in the piece, but like my buddy Graham, who was has a company called Press Gang Theater and had what originally when he started out was doing these storytelling nights down at the Handlebar in Kensington Market, and so now. Graham is under the impression that my piece was supposed to be 5 minutes. And he says it was actually 20 minutes that I did that night. I'm pretty sure it was maybe like 8, but that's up for debate. So whatever. I do tend to like break the rules a little bit, especially at his events. But yeah, so he was doing this piece this night that was all about milestones, and I had done a couple of his nights before, and usually it was just like. Me being like, hello, I'm Jiv, and boom, critical race theory. So he was like, that's cool. Can you do something maybe a little bit lighter? Everybody's got like some really heavy stories tonight. So I was like, okay, I'll tell a story about a cow. So I did that piece there, and I kind of mixed it with like Hinduism and a little bit about the indentureship. And then, Graham was a big fan of it. It went over pretty well. The next time I kind of had an opportunity. BCAR and Performing Arts has a festival they do called the Rock Paper Sisters Festival, which has a big focus on African Caribbean diaspora. So I thought this was a chance to actually really get in front of like a Caribbean audience, which for me was a big part of it. So I expanded the piece a little bit. Their theme was around spirituality, and I think that the overall theme of the festival was higher power. So I wanted to invest a little bit in looking at the more spiritual aspect of it. Started to incorporate like certain aspects of ritual, or well, not actual ritual, but like referencing it throughout the piece. And then that one was I'd say about 25 minutes or so. Then a buddy of mine was there with a piece that he was doing, and he was starting a festival in Surrey, British Columbia, called the Monsoon Festival, South Asian focus. So I went over there and I did a slightly longer version to largely a South Asian audience, which was probably the most nerve-wracking thing I've ever done, but well received, which was cool and encouraging. And then, after that, it was, we had kind of gotten to the crux of like what is basically the first, well, I'd say a third of the play overall, but like the first major chunk of the play. If you were to divide, there's kind of a natural split in half part, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about later. Yeah, so we got to there, and then we just we were like, oh, this play sucks. Like it was perfectly, yeah, it was like a nice story, but it wasn't really doing anything. Like it was like kind of the thing that we criticized in the play. It was just that. And so eventually, like we were doing a workshop at Pass Marai because we were programmed to go up that year. And I was bashing my head against the ground, literally the ground, like the stage floor. And Tom was in the audience who was developing the play with me. And I was just like, man, this play's about nothing. And then he was like, oh, yeah, let's do that. Like the play is about nothing. Like, what does that mean in this context? And then we basically we didn't get much further in that workshop. But then over like the next period, I kind of churned out like an additional 30, 40 minutes of material based on that, like kind of expanding that idea throughout. And yeah, it helped really enforce like what the piece is. Pandemic theater, unfortunately titled company Pandemic Theater. One of our big things is that there should always be a political well, we're a socio-political company, so there should always be a political action with the piece. And I think this kind of helped us frame it that way, in a way that felt good for us. So yeah, gradual development, my ideal process, because I always get to test it with audiences, and I'm definitely more that kind of creator. Like I need that validation to be like, is it good? I don't know.
So fun.
Yeah.
So you mentioned in the play a little bit about identity plays and the idea of identity plays. Was there a conscious decision somewhere along that process that it was now going to be about identity plays? How does it kind of occupy that space?
Yeah, it criticizes identity plays quite a bit, but it is, in essence, it's just that, right? Like, so it's a very millennial version of like, this thing's stupid, watch me do this thing.
It's very meta.
Yeah. Yeah, like I suppose like some of the meta theatrics of it is that like as a person of color doing like a solo show type thing, it's pretty rare that like specifically as like a younger person of color doing it, and that young now, but like there's a thing where often that first play it's an identity play. So it's like, I'm from this culture and I have a trouble assimilating into this culture. Let me go find my culture and come back and be like, I'm okay. There's nothing wrong with that narrative. I mean, there's something I think there's some problematics to it. A lot of it does deal, I think, ultimately with this kind of like othering of the home country, and also kind of like assimilation into the new country, and with that a kind of like overt gratitude, like a kind of like pandering to national identity, like we are all Canadian principle.
Totally.
Yeah, so that's not something that I'm super jazzed about artistically, and it's something like for myself, I'm very much like an anti-nationalist. So and the company, but Pandemic, basically everything we've done is like very clearly anti-nationalist. So there's some complexities there. So the piece was that, but the thing that we kind of got to at its core was I was doing an identity play, Indo-Caribbean identity, but a major part of it is Hinduism. And in Hinduism, or in my tradition of Hinduism that I grew up with, and as I continue to study, the concept of identity, like me versus you type thing, like I and you are a different person, is what we would call Maya. So it's an illusion. So in order to actually doing an identity play in some ways as a Hindu is counterproductive to like the Sanatana Dharma path. It's like, it's just acknowledging and reinforcing the myth of it all. So that became a big part of that tension. I would like to be able to do a piece to represent my heritage and all that, but in doing so, I'm actually failing at the spiritual path.
Sure.
So that's kind of where that came from.
Totally. Speaking of identity, what was it like writing and I guess performing as a character that's so similar to yourself?
Yeah. I mean, easier.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. It's obviously the character gets very conflated with me. Like the character's name is Jiv. My name is Jivesh, but I go by Jiv. So like, it's very clearly, it's super, super close to me. And so much of everything, like basically everything in the piece is drawn from autobiographical material. but it's not exactly as things happen necessarily. Like some parts are a little bit embellished, some parts are actually played down a bit. So it's using kind of the experiences that I've had, and then like kind of putting it in the context of the person on the character on stage that night, kind of like going through these motions in a way. So like allowing in a lot of ways, like you could just say like, oh no, it's just Jiv on stage telling some stories, which is also true, but I guess it's more like a psychological thing in some ways for me, like giving myself the ability to separate myself a little bit from what it actually is, allows me a certain artistic freedom to be like, you know, like this is actually what went down, and this would have been the sequence of events. And if I were really telling the story like as it happens, like journalistically or something, I would want to like in a documentary form really explain certain things. In this one, it's fine. Like the character in the moment should have like certain places of ignorance that like now in my life I'm a little bit further away from. So like, something that would come up is people would often be like, oh, what's it like reliving that trauma on stage? It's like, I am not doing that, actually. I'm really just like, I'm saying the words, I'm doing some movements, like, I'm not reliving anything that I haven't worked past. But the character has to, like, make it look like that, kind of. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting that in the script, there's a lot about adaptation. Yeah. And I guess what I find interesting as somebody who has also done a performance is, this may be too philosophical to go into in half an hour even.
I'm so down.
At what point does it turn from adaptation to an entirely new play, being a play that's so rooted in identity and that main character?
Yeah. I mean, like, it's a great question. And so, yeah, like there's, for folks who haven't read it, like in the kind of like intro, there's like a note about like a process of adaptation. Like from my perspective, I think like in theory, the play could be done by just about anyone. But it would require kind of a process of like changing some stories probably, and like kind of adapting like the ritual aspects of something for the person who's performing it. So that is quite real. So like in a way it becomes like a new play. The structure, I guess, would kind of probably remain the same. But like for me, when you adapt something, it is ultimately like a new piece of art. It takes inspiration from something. And what I've done in this piece is really it's adapted from some life stories that I've got, and adapted from some Puranic I wouldn't refer to mythology myself, but like Puranic poetry, Puranic kind of philosophy, but some people will call it mythology, and that's fine too. So I've already done that adaptation work. And also like adapting like stuff from Frantz Fanon and stuff like into the piece. So it's like, that's already so much part of it. So like, yeah, it would be probably different text-wise, but it's so much these days when I think about like performance and like live performing arts, like it's about what the intention is. So, and this piece in particular, yeah, like there's a real intentionality in doing it every night when I do it. Like I have to kind of put ego aside. Like I can't get angry at the audience at any point, like otherwise it falls apart. It's happened once and it was awful. I don't know if it looked different to them. It was awful for me. So setting that intention and carrying through that intention through the piece is actually, to me, what the core of it is. So it's a whole different piece, but it obeys the structure, I suppose. Like that structure, to me, is the same thing. Well, in that same way, like you and I are different people in a case of Maya, but it doesn't really matter. Like there's just manifestation of the same thing. It's a distraction. So, I mean, if you want to get into the philosophy of like, boom, there you go.
Very cool. Very cool. Let's talk about your stage directions in the script that's been published. They were really funny to read, a lot of them. Were they something that you originally included in the script that you performed off of, or did you curate those when it was distributed for reading purposes?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't in the script I performed from, because we were like making it on the fly. Like I would come in every day and be like, how about this part? And Graham and Tom would be like, that's stupid. I'd be like, okay, go away, come back. How about this? Yeah, so like that was the script, I guess you could say, that existed at that point. Like Heather, who was stage magic, did a great job of keeping it together. Like, but on my end, it was a hot mess of like various stuff. So the stage directions, we added in after the fact to kind of give a sense of what was just kind of happening on stage. There's also like a lot of footnotes, like kind of as I went through, and putting the publication together, because it was like, well, this is context, and also I can't resist making jokes like as I go. It's just a thing about me, and you know, you're reading it. If you're reading it in the book, it's different than seeing it live. So I want to provide as much humor as I can, like commentary as we go. But yeah, so it wasn't in originally. It certainly came, and actually, so a lot of the stage directions that are there came out of, and we did an open audio description, integrated audio description performance at Theatre Passe Muraille, which is a big thing they do. So like a little bit different from your standard audio description. So it's a little bit more like emotionally invested. So it's not so much like just very clearly telling you what happens. There's a little bit more of an artistic bent to it. And so that was the thing we did, where Tom was just like, so I was on stage here at the Theatre Passe Muraille backspace, and Tom was just like up on the balcony here and just speaking into a mic. And so we had to make these descriptions of what's happening and then try to have some humor to them, and like have moments for us to kind of like interact a little bit. So it was all happening live. So yeah, that's kind of where most of that comes from. So actually, you could really say Tom probably wrote most of the stage directions.
Awesome, go Tom.
Yeah.
You mentioned that obviously reading the play and experiencing the play are two very different things. Do you think that, I guess, like the message of the play, how did you go about making sure that that translated through both of those different mediums? Was that intentional at all?
Yeah, I mean, like, I suppose the benefit, like, with a publication is that I've also got, like, the opportunity to do an introduction and a preface and footnotes and all sorts of stuff. And so that helps, because like in the live performance itself, like while I don't necessarily, you know, obviously there's like program notes when you come to a play, there's stuff like that, but a lot of, especially how my style of working and how we made this piece, like there are aspects that we need to kind of try to provide that counterpoint in the text. So like we use sound a lot in the piece. So I also did the sound design on the piece. And so like a lot of it is underscored. Like with different aspects, and that underscoring is used to really create some critical distance. So there'll be like parts where I'm talking about like a pretty violent history of like the Indian indentureship, but underneath it, I'm using like a South African like penny whistle tunes. It's really like upbeat, kind of sales pitchy, and so like it helps to kind of not let people, or at least my intention is to like move quick enough through like emotional states that no one is lingering too long on it, and that it keeps moving forward. Ultimately, what we're trying to get to, what I'm trying to get to, I would say, is like it is kind of at the end of the piece. I feel like it's a genuine kind of like loving offering to the audience, and that's where I want to get it. And those steps along the way, certainly from like a South Asian dramaturgical tradition, like that, those steps along the way kind of help like anchor these certain emotional realities for people. Living in one too long would change the context of the piece, but they all kind of inform getting to the point where there is this what would be called rati in that tradition moment between like audience and performer. If it works, I'm not sure. It seems to work live. I don't know if it fully works in the piece, but the good thing about it is that like it might mean that the published form takes on a different tone altogether. Sure, so I'm excited to see how that goes.
Cool. And then at one point in the play, there is a part where you ask certain audience members who don't have experiences living in the margins, quote unquote, is the word that is used, to briefly remove themselves from the space. And I thought it was really interesting that you translated that into the script as well, the read version.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the thought process behind making that decision and including that?
Yeah, like the script version of it, like the one that we've got in the publication here, or?
Yes, or just in general, like that creative decision to move audience members.
Well, I mean, like, there's a couple things to it. Like, on the one hand, I really view, like I was saying before, like pandemics theater, pieces should always have some form of an action associated with them. So whether that's in the content or like literally causing an action in the audience. And so on the one hand, I kind of view like what theater is or what it should be as a kind of a rehearsal for everyday life. So there's this opportunity to make an affinity space so that you can, so if you have a more of a mainstream experience, you can actually make that space by creating space, by leaving the room for a little bit for folks who do, and allow the creation of that affinity space. And that's something that I think in life, hopefully, I mean, in my circles, it's pretty common. If someone's like, hey, circle out, like we got to have an inside talk. Like that's pretty normal.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, and I think it should be, right? Like it's nothing, I got no problem with that. Like if I was told to like leave because there's got to be an inside thing, but I'm used to it. I'm just used to that now. A lot of people aren't. So this is an opportunity to, in a pretty safe environment, try that out. Ultimately though, like where it comes from, and I'll have to look up who it was. This is the thing, because I didn't actually go to the talk, but one of the times I was doing this show was at the Caminos Festival, which Aluna Theatre and Native Earth Performing Arts collaborate on. And I had missed the day session because I was rehearsing to do this piece at night. But there was an Indigenous scholar there who had written a piece, and he specifically had a section that was not to be read by settlers. And so he also knew that, like, yeah, settlers were going to read it anyway. So he wrote it in a certain way. And so I was curious to say, like, well, can I do that on stage? There was also a thing that had happened recently in my hometown. So Lido Pimente was playing a concert. And one of the things that she does is she just says, hey, brown girls up front. And that's pretty normal. That did not go over that well with a lot of the Halifax people who were like, what the hell, right? It's like, okay, well, this is still an issue in my hometown, then like we should be putting it in action. So that was a way to say like, well, we're not intrinsically a big part of the piece. And my major criticism really against identity plays is that the person of color, marginalized person identity play is still made for the gaze of the majority to watch it. And so we wanted to break that a little bit by saying like, we're all here together doing this thing. This part is not for that gaze. And there are certain things that I will not say in public in that context with a mixed audience that I can say with not a mixed audience. And for me, that's just, if you have an experience of marginalization, stay, because I've got some stuff to talk to you about, that's some real stuff. If you don't, I don't want you getting bad ideas about like, this is not, the conversation is not,
for sure.
I can't represent the complexity of that conversation, and I don't want you to think I'm speaking on anyone's behalf. So that's kind of what that time is. Okay. Yeah.
And then my last question is that you've got some things going on today with Rumble and with pandemic. And did you want to talk about that and let us know?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, major thing is like, so pandemic and Rumble, like we've got our stuff online, and you can find us there. The major thing I've collaborated on today is there is a piece called Digital Vigil, and that's happening through New Harlem Productions, which is a very close collaborator of mine, Donna Michelle St. Bernard, and others have put together a really interesting piece, or I really like it. So I've kind of I did a bit of the design on it, but it's a collaboration with Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists, kind of, I suppose just a meditation on today and where we're at with what today means for a lot of people.
Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I can't wait to go and check that out at some point today.
Yeah. And it's on Facebook Live. So if you search Digital Vigil New Harlem, you should be able to find it. And I think there is an event as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for all of your thoughts and wisdom. And I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you so much.
All right. To get your copy of Take the Milk Na and a plethora of other outstanding plays, go to playwrightscanada.com. This has been today's WOTS Weekly Feature. Tune in next week for History Week, where we'll be chatting with special guests from Spacing and Dundurn Press. For discounts and deals, check out toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca/weekly-features. From all of us at WOTS, happy reading.